Hello and welcome to the texturing tutorial for the Phantasm Ball. Reading in the modeled Phantasm Ball and taking a look here at the outliner. You see that everything is still a separate mesh. I have several layers I've put things into. You don't have to have it the exact same way, but you should have these different parts in different layers so that you can turn them on and off as you want to work on items. And hopefully you've renamed your mesh more than I have. But this is kind of how we want to rename the models, is to give them a name of what they are, and then usually I have the suffix at the end, not the prefix, describing what it is. So Pball, top, bottom, etc. So let's jump in and take a look at some things. First of all, whenever you think about the way that Maya flays things as a UV set, if you come in and take a look at the way that it understands the layout, you'll see that although you may see this as a sphere, this is still seen as kind of a flat square, meaning that if you were to put a texture on this object, Maya would set it up and sort of wallpaper it all the way through evenly, which means that this square, although it looks like the exact same size as that square, when you look at where those squares are, this is around sort of the hemisphere of the sphere, whereas this smaller square up here is going to be much tinier. So it's going to take whatever texture you give it, and it's going to squeeze it up here. So even though you can lay out a very simple looking texture that's one by one all the way through, it's going to squeeze things at the top. So we have a choice here. One of them is to whether or not we have the sphere laid out like a flat map, which is sort of the default of Maya, or whether we can take these spheres and actually make them into sort of orange slices in the UV sets to reflect the actual mass of how these are laid out. So the way that we do that is we tell Maya, first of all, we'd like to cut things because it needs to know if it's going to squeeze them in at the hemisphere, exactly where those cuts are. And Maya has a couple of ways of doing this. And one of the ways you can kind of see this best is these layout of the world. We need to know exactly where to cut along the UVs. And remember, we're not actually modifying the model, we're just modifying the way Maya thinks about laying it out. So effectively, as a foreman, you have told Maya, this is the way I want you to wallpaper this object here. And if you give Maya different directions on how to wallpaper it, the object stays the same, but your directions change. So the first thing we'd have to do, just for an exercise of reading in a simple sphere, is you can double click along an entire edge, and let's just choose several of these edges, because this is more of an experiment of how the tool set works. Now we can cut these edges. The problem is, what we're going to do is we're going to cut these edges, and then we're going to relax the entire UV set. Now what relax means is you're asking it to sort of lay out the UV sets as per the constraints of how it's built as a model. So in this case, when you ask Maya to relax it, it's going to relax these edges to pinch, very much like they are here in the model. So it will relax along the cut edges, so we have to cut these first, so that, like this example, we'd have to cut these edges. But we really want the hemisphere to not be selected, because that's going to be the thing that sort of anchors it's the way it relaxes things. And this is best done as a simple experiment so that you can see how the tool works. So the first thing I'm going to do is deselect kind of the middle, the hemisphere here. And then I'm going to come up here to cut and sew in the UV editor. And I'm just going to cut this. Boom. Now because I have the borders on, it allows me to see what I've cut. If you have the borders selection off, you can't really get any indication of what has been severed here in Maya. So when you turn the borders on, using this little hotkey right there, that you can actually see both in the 3D modeling window as well as in this UV editor where you've made the cuts, so that when you now grab all the UVs you want to relax, and make sure not to grab the sort of the anchor points here, Maya can do a great job relaxing everything. The last thing we want to do before we jump in and actually relax these UV sets, these little spiky picket fence tops, let's merge those together, because there's really no reason for them to remain shark teeth here at the top. So using this method, we can come up and actually sew them together. Shift S under cut and sew. But before we do that, let's just select and then shift select all of them in one fell swoop, and then go to cut sew and then sew them all together at once. And what that's going to do is create a singular point, which if this is going to be one of the little orange slices, that you sort of merge them all together so it's a little easier to do. So we just go along the rest of these edges and kind of grab them as they belong to each set. In fact, I think I can do just one big selection like so. I believe the hotkey for it was Command S. Let's go up and validate that. It is Shift S. Okay, so Shift S, sew it together. Next set, this, Shift S. Next set, these fellas here, Shift S, and the last ones, Shift S. It's sort of imperfect, but I'm going to do it to the top rows and not the bottom so you can see the differences. So now with the UVs grabbed, we want to come in and grab the upper and bottom sections that we want to relax, leaving this belt line of the sphere alone, and go over to Modify, and then go down to something called Unfold. Now watch what happens the minute we unfold it all. Boom. It turns into these little slices, and it much more accurately mirrors the way that this sphere is actually set up. Okay, one of the things you want to make sure you're doing when you unfold these is that you do not use the default. You come up here and reset your settings. The default is Unfold 3D, and it gives us a very odd look. It kind of flares things. We can't really use that flare. So when you use Modify, Unfold, make sure to use Legacy. That's the one you want. And it gives you that nice slices. So that you can see a face selection here and a face selection up at the top are actually a lot more accurate to the way the modeling sees it. And so there are several different ways in Maya to texture things, and in this case we are trying to make the UV layout a little more accurate to the model layout so that it's evident to the texture artist that this is going to be a small triangular slice here at the top, or a seeming triangular slice, versus something that is a nice big sort of rectangle at the near the equator here. All right, so let's move on to setting things up in the Phantasm Ball the same way, knowing what the relaxing of various UVs will do. Actually, one of the last sort of shots I want to give about what we're going to be doing to the Phantasm Ball is if you were to read in a cylinder. This is going to be a little trick we utilize around, say, the doorknob parts, and that is when we come down and select one edge. I know that you've got the double click trick, but if you grab 1, 2, maybe 3 edges here, you can come up to something here in Maya called Select, and instead of keeping your selection the way it is, you can actually convert that selection, and you want to select it to Edge Ring. Now watch what happens. We've only selected 3 edges, but if I select Edge Ring, it will select all of the parallel edges sort of aligning to it. We want to utilize another neat trick. Come up here to Select and go down to Convert Selection to Edge Loop. See, it selects the whole thing. Now that's kind of cool. If you grab the vertical edges, we can also utilize this modification. So if you convert the selection to Edge Ring, it grabs all the parallel lines all the way around it this way. Now that's pretty cool because we learned that trick of double clicking, but there is no such trick double clicking and grabbing this ring. It's only going to grab everything connected to it as an edge. So if we wanted to grab all of the sort of the opposite rings going the other direction, we instead can use this little trick where we grab just the horizontal edges, come up to Select, Convert Selection, and go down to Edge Ring, and it'll select the ring all the way around. All right, so with that in mind, we can jump in and start modeling, start UV cutting up Maya. By the way, what I have here is a little bit of a drawing issue. You see the way that that's jittering? That's because I have my field, sort of the Maya camera that's drawing things is between a certain point to begin and then a certain point to end. And this jittering is usually indicative of having my camera way too close to the beginning drawing plane, way too close to the camera. So what you can do for that is to come up here to View, grab Select Camera, then go to View one more time, go down to Camera Attribute Editor, and it comes up and I can see that the near clipping plane is 0.003, which is okay if I'm getting really close and doing some work, but otherwise I just put it at 1, and the minute I type in 1, those drawing issues kind of disappear. There's no more jittering. I also can type in something like 10,000 here because that's just fine. All right, so let's jump on in. The first thing we want to do is to come into the object mode, grab this, and because I've got things in layers, I can actually just focus on setting up this bottom bowl initially. So let's have a go at that. Okay. So come up here to Windows, go down to the modeling editors, always have your UV editor up. The other thing you're going to want to bring up and just kind of leave up on the side is your outliner. The UV toolkit's pretty useful at this point because we're going to be utilizing things for, people usually utilize this for the modeling toolkit, but you can bring up the UV toolkit as well. For those of you interested in knowing how it comes up, you can always go over to Windows and you can bring up the modeling toolkit, which pops open. The minute you've got something selected and you come over to Windows, General Editor or Modeling Editors and go to the UV editor, watch another toolkit pops up, and that's the UV toolkit. So with this selected, you can press F in either screen and it should be able to frame that which you've selected. In this case, the UVs have been laid out in a very odd way. First of all, they've been laid out like sort of a simple wall, which we can discern that is sort of the circumference of this. It's the outer layer of this model. But these squares here are a bit odd. Now what happened is we extruded this lip. And when you extrude something in Maya, it does not think of it as several interconnected polygons. It basically lays flat the UVs of every single one of these polygons right on top of each other. So if we go to face selection mode and grab this selection square, grabbing everything in that selection square, it's going to grab the whole of each of these teeth at the top. Luckily, there's a way we can get through this, which is you can go up to UVs here in Maya and actually do a planar projection. So go to the options of that because we're going to be projecting top down, so you're going to want to make sure that it's got Y-axis selected and just hit apply. And that'll do a nice big sort of photograph of all these things top down, and you can grab, since the UVs are already selected, the face is already selected, you can just move it off the surgery table, leaving this section for us to focus on alone. Now before we begin, the assignment in this case is that your texture has already been provided for you, and the texture is available on Blackboard, but you can download it from there, or you could also come over here and just observe this and see where things probably are going to be going when you map them onto the model. Now this is the spheres here, the upper and lower part, so we're going to need to arrange those slices so that they actually lay over this particular texture. In fact, one thing which you may want to do is immediately place a shader that inputs the texture onto everything, so you can turn the picture or the texture, the image of the texture, on and off for alignment purposes. So let's just take a moment and quickly do that. And by that you come in here to the rendering editors, go down to Hypershade. Hypershade will come up. And you want to come in here and click on Lambert, create a new Lambert shader. Lambert 2 in this case. Do not use Lambert 1, leave it alone. It's the default shader in Maya. You don't want to color or affect this because it's going to color everything you bring in with that Lambert 1, so leave it alone. Just go to Lambert 2 and you can quickly come in and name this Pball texture shader. So you want to click on your shader for the Pball texture shader, or you can just name it Pball shader. And click on the checkerboard square in the far end of the color selection. And what this will do is pop up the Create Render Node window. From here, you simply want to select the 2D textures options because you're going to be reading in an image. Then go to File, click on File. It will automatically connect that shader to the input of a file, which it currently cannot find as it hasn't been assigned, so everything turns sort of ochre. But that's going to be good for you when you assign the material to your selection of the Pball, because you can see whether or not instantly, when you read in the image you want, that the model will inherit that image. So let's come over to where the images are. It may dump you out here in your default area, but just take a minute and find that texture. And I put mine on the desktop inside of the folder here. So when you open that up, it will automatically inherit this if you press the 6 on your keyboard, and you can see actually how sort of misaligned things are. But we can come up to the UV editor and click on this icon showing the image that's associated with that shader, and it'll come in over our UV sets. Now, majority of the time we don't really want to bring this in because it's quite distracting, but when we're ready to, so I'm going to hit 5 here in the modeling window, not 6, which is textured, but 5, which is hard shaded. And I'm going to come up here to the UV editor as well and turn that image off, but I have it connected now, so if I ever want to see if I'm aligning things correctly, I can just press this little icon here and it'll pop on. So let's forage ahead with texturing up cutting up the Phantasm Ball to retroactively fit. So one of the things that I want to show before we get started with cutting this up is that if we turn the image on, we will be able to see the alignment. And if we just look at the image here, this area where the merlons are, it starts and then divots down, comes up, and so there is sort of an equal section of these higher merlons on either side. Now what that informs me is that my current setup's not going to work, and here's why. I don't have a higher merlon here. Let's do this. Let's just grab some edges and then press F so I can come in close. Whoops. And that didn't work because every time you grab an edge, it's going to grab its brother edge because these are actually the same edge, remember. So UV is not modeling. Maya actually can, every time you select an edge, will select, I'd say, the other edge, but that's a misnomer because it's the same edge. Remember, this wraps around. So if we want to come in close, choose something that's not connected to anything else, those two, and then I can come in close and make my point, which is these two teeth here, these two little merlons, are here. But I need one of these higher sections over here on the left if I want it to match this setup in the UVs, in the texture. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fix this first by coming over here and double clicking this edge so that it runs the length, and then I'm going to come up here to cut so, and I'm going to cut it. Now, if yours is not set up like this, don't worry about it. This is only for people who may have had the same setup that I did. If yours actually starts high, goes down, comes up, goes down, you're fine. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to right click and hold this down for the wheel spoke menu, and I'm going to go to UV shell selection, and this allows me to grab the entire new separated section and press W, which is just translate, and move it over here to the other side, which is where I need it. And I'm going to grab these, just double click this edge. Don't want that, that's a little too much. But I can grab one of these edges and go to modify, and I can bring it over and sew it. So what I can do is grab this edge. Again, every time you grab an edge, just because you're able to separate these UVs doesn't mean you've created a new set of edges. So these two things are actually the same edge because it's this singular edge here in the model. So it is kind of weird, but you have to understand the way Maya thinks about UVs is separately from the modeling, and people make the assumption that this is a model and this is a model, and they're actually laid out differently and they have different rules. But if I just want to bring this together here and sort of sew it back on, I want to grab not just one, but pretty much all the edges here that I want to bring over and sew, and I come up to cut sew and move down to move and sew because it's going to move the smaller section to the bigger and sew it together. Let's go and grab the UV shell again and just move it over a little bit so we can have all of it on the surgery table. And this is okay to eyeball because you're going to be moving this around later. And this allows us the chance to jump in and start cutting this up. Now, one of the things that we're going to be doing is not just cutting UVs, moving UVs, but also snapping UVs. And since the grid snap in here does not necessarily align to where we have the lines, there is something we can use to fix little mistakes like this, which is that we grab instead the UVs, several of the UVs, and we want to go to this UV toolkit here on the side. In fact, we can get rid of the modeling toolkit because we don't really need those up yet anymore. And what we want to do is we want to align and snap. So go down to Align and Snap, open that up. We're going to be doing a lot of this later, so let's get used to it now. If you don't have an example like this, what you might want to do is just grab one UV and shove it up a bit. So what we want to do is we want to align this UV with the others. That's kind of our point of reference, but it's relative. It's not absolute like snapping it to the grid. If we snap things to the grid like we can in the modeling window, that actually doesn't help, and that doesn't help. So all these quadrants are a bit weird. We don't really want them. What we do want is to take this UV and say, okay, I need to straighten it out according to its brothers and sisters here around it. And to do that, we have these align hotkeys. And every time you see that edge, it basically means it's going to take the furthest and align it against, well, let me describe this better. It's going to take the UVs that are selected and align it according to where that little white wall is. In this case, the white wall is vertical. So it's going to align them vertically, and it's going to align them on the far right. So if I grab these, it's going to align this middle UV along with those on to the right of it. So I'm going to grab all three as a point of reference and then click on this particular icon, and it snaps them over according to the others. And in this case, I'm grabbing all the correct ones as well as the incorrect ones, slightly incorrect. I'm getting closer and kind of show that. But I can use a similar icon, which is this one here, where the white line is on the bottom, because I want it to snap down according to its neighbors. So if I hit that, boom, it does so. So we're going to be doing a lot of alignment, in this case, not by snapping to the grid, but lining it up to other UVs. Okay, so let's jump in. We just went through the tricks of how to do this with a sphere, and so this should make things a little bit easier. So you want to go into edge mode. The way I like to do things is just use that double click trick. We're going to basically double click through every sort of middle of these two Merlin teeth. And that's pretty much all we want. The way you can deselect things is just hold down the control key and left mouse button, square selection. We want to deselect these two initial rings. Make very sure not only what you have selected, but what you don't. It's not just this first section sort of between the teeth here, but the one underneath it. We need a full line, a full unbroken line of polygon faces to make sure that this thing is going to be sort of nailed down so that when everything else relaxes, these two rows do not relax, and that's what keeps it sort of nailed in place. So now we're ready to cut. Come up to cut sew, just go down to cut. And what you should see at this point, if you click off, are all the lines in the appropriate places. So with our edge selection tool still on, come in here and let's do what we did with the sphere earlier, which is to grab these edges and sew them together. And remember that it's Shift S, and you can grab ones out here in space and then go in, and this is me sort of avoiding that avoiding this on occasion pretty irritating little controller. So I'm just grabbing those and pressing Shift S. You can do probably a better job than I did with quickly going through it. At this point, we're going to select very specifically the areas we want to relax, which again are everything below these this unbroken polygon strip. So we do not want to grab this. You want any of that ring. You want to grab the previous one, which is all this stuff underneath it. Just think of these as sort of, paper strips cut from a piece of paper of someone advertising to teach you guitar. You want to grab the numbers or whatever. So with that selected, come up here to Modify and go down to Unfold, and it should unfold in exactly the way that you need it. And again, we can just turn on the picture. Now we're kind of getting closer to what we need to line things up. Not just these orange slices, wedges here, but if we look at the texture for the Merlins, they're actually lined up. Everyone starts high, goes low with a little divot, comes up again. So that's a good thing to do, is just be aware of the malleability of doing these UV sets and what you can and can't do, which is slightly different from modeling. All right, so the next thing we want to do, let's turn this off, is actually, let's turn it on. So the next thing we want to do is we want to have, you see these little metal bits, these little metal bars here? Well, this metal bar texture is going to be this upper lip. We haven't grabbed that and done anything with it since we did the initial projection. So now we're going to go in and grab, a face or whatever, and we can see the corresponding face here. This is circular. Now, so we have to take each of these little sections on each of these tiny Merlons and sort of pound it flat. How are we going to do that? Well, the first thing we want to do is we want to separate this circle, which is what it is right now, and into the same sections that we did for each orange slice. So these little slices here in sections of 3 and then I guess 10 or 12 down, we want to cut these up into the appropriate sections up here, so we can cut this whole face section here to align with this orange slice. The way to do that is to come in here using edge selection mode and just quickly jump along the middle of each of the Merlin teeth and grab it and just have that selection selected. Press F to make sure that that's all you have selected. Maybe you can even press 4 to validate that. And we want to cut those. Okay, so come in here to cut so, and then cut. Wonderful. So what we can do now is, with these different sections cut, we want to come in here to the UV shells. See, these are all different now. So the next step is to sort of put them all on top of each other pretty quickly. And all I'm doing is I'm using the same rotate and translate tools that I do for modeling. And I'm just trying to get them kind of on top of each other. And this is something where you can do it by hand quickly, and it doesn't really, again, I wouldn't get too worried about it, trying to line things up perfectly, because I don't think that's going to happen. Now, one of the things you can notice that we did by virtue of the projection down is we actually took the faces that are sort of on the inside here. Let me go back to shaded mode. All these faces, all these little tiny faces here. See that? Because we projected down, we took all of these polygons that are kind of in the inner section of the lip of this bowl, and we've reduced them to lines, just straight up and down. So we got to spread those out, and we will. Again, we've been using this nice little kind of relax or unfold trick, and we will be doing the same. But instead of us doing it one at a time to each of these new separate pieces, if we line them all up together, we can do it all in a single operation. So I've kind of lined them all up, but what we're not seeing is these little faces right in here. In every one of these projections is just a line. And so this polygon, or rather these polygons, are hidden. We don't want that. So what we want to do is we're going to grab all these UVs at once and come up here to Modify and then do an Unfold. now what we have is we have, go back to UV shell, we have these things that have relaxed a bit and revealed those polygons. So at this point I want to line things up a little bit again. They're not going to be perfect by any stretch, but I want to line them up so that I can get those two sort of polygon edges to get kind of on top of each other, because I'm going to be trying to sort out several things at once using that align left and right that we did earlier. So we've done a little more of a careful job. I'm not worried about these outlying edges. Those are a little more obvious. In fact, if we grab UVs here, we can grab all these at once. That's fine. What I really focused on is these blue lines, trying to line them up, because again, we don't want that polygon in the middle to be hidden anymore. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the selection of all of these edges, and I'm going to be going over here to the UV toolkit. Whoops, that was interesting. I'm going to go over to the UV toolkit. What it did was it thought I wanted to dock it there, and then did. And I didn't, Maya. Stop it, man. So I'm going to grab these UVs right here, and I'm going to line them to the far left. I don't actually care where they go. I just want them to be together. So I'm going to line them up on the horizontal axis by clicking this, and they do. And I'm going to do the same thing with the next pair and the pair after that. I'm trying to be very careful with what I select. In fact, if you think you might have selected something there by mistake, don't be afraid to just grab a section of something and press F, because it gets you really close and you can do a much better job selecting. So I'm going to grab those, and I'm just aligning all of these at once. And look what we can do here. Since this is an outlying area, we just, boom, line them all up. Wonderful. And the next thing we're going to do is kind of the same trick, only this time it's going to be aligning things down. You know what? Let's not do that first. Let's align the bottom ones, because that's going to snap them below and get them out of the way of the work of the uppers. So at this point, we're going to grab this, click on the icon on the far right, and they all align to the bottom. And we have a much clearer way of grabbing everything at the top and frankly doing the same. Okay, so now we have every single one of these sections, but they don't line up as they should to each of these little orange slices. So I'm going to grab them, pull them over, and try to align them on the top the same way. In fact, let's do this for now. Grab the UV shell of these, and let's just have a bit of organization by dragging them down and maybe scaling them down a bit, so we can start just getting that lovely little validation of making them match the texture. Now in this case, you can actually stretch them in any axis you want. You don't have to keep them all in the same scaling uniformly. And I'm having, it's a little bit harder doing it this way because I'm just focusing on this left side. But you can see how you can just line things up perfectly. And the other thing is that I want to come in here to the UV sets and use a selection square so it grabs all of them, and try to align them on top of just one of these little orange slices here. So I can do that best by just scaling and moving and doing it again, because again we're just trying to get it all in one area. So this is a little it's not aligning perfectly, that's fine, but this is where we can start doing alignment of each of these edges one at a time. So I'm going to grab the UVs, and again I'm grabbing them all at once, so all these different sections are on top of each other, and I'm going to use that trick of alignment to line them up right to this edge here of the orange slice by clicking this button, because the white edge is to the furthest right, which is I want these to align to the far right. So click, that worked. And I'm going to align these to the far right so they sort of line up there. And I'm going to align these over to the left because this is my template. This is what I want to match. This is what I want to modify. So in this case, I'm going to snap it over here to the far left, and sort of the last grand snap will be the edges here aligning to the orange slices. So that's pretty much how we're going to line things up. Everything has been done kind of at once. You can turn the pictures back on and see, oh, well, we need to move things down a bit to match where the texture actually is. And that looks pretty good. So what you can do here, just with a little bit of work we've done, is give yourself kind of a bit of gratification by going in here to the 3D modeling window and pressing 6, and things are starting to line up. You know, especially see the effect if you go into object mode and click off the object. That's not looking half bad. So it's not perfect, of course. We haven't aligned everything, but there should be some section that looks pretty cool. At least it's beginning to, which is fine. So for extra credit cleanup, you can take a look at your object here and say, well, those rivets look kind of squashed. Can we do anything about that? And you can. If you grab the UVs, not the edge, if you grab the UVs of something and move them up, they should modify. In fact, let's grab the UVs here and here. Move them all up at once until they, well, I didn't grab everything, it sort of toggled it, didn't it? There we are. Grab it up about halfway through. You can see that these are starting to look a little bigger, but they're also starting to look wonky in the second half. So if I grab these and move them up, so what I'm doing is I'm aligning these bottom UVs to the bottom of this image, and I'm aligning the ones immediately above it sort of halfway down. It starts sorting things out a little nicer. And using this same trick, now that we have sort of definitive height, you know, in the up and down direction for these two levels, turn the image off, go full screen with your UVs, and we can use our little trick, which is we want to grab the one that's aligned correctly and all the, oops, and then all the other ones that are not aligned correctly, and do that little trick where we move them up using the UV toolkit. So snap them all up at once. And then the next level we want to worry about is immediately below it. And by the way, if this gets up in your face and you don't like it so much, press the minus key and it'll actually decrease the size of the controller. And of course it corresponds to plus as well. So I've got the limit I want to go to, and then I have all these other UVs here. And I'm going to go to the Align Up button here. Click. Wonderful. So now we go all the way around the, not all the way around because we didn't sort, again, everything out. But it just looks a little bit nicer until we get about halfway through, and that's a different section. We'll worry about that in a minute. For now, these are finally circular. So the last thing you want to do, since we know that in this image, the this sort of steel area runs the length of these little orange slices, is you want to come in and turn off the image, go into UV shell selection mode, drag each of these up because you're going to want to separate them out and sort of find where they belong. In other words, we have a length of these 6 orange slices. We have then corresponding 6 sections immediately above it of that the lip of this bowl, and we want to make sure that we're aligning them on top of all of the proper slices. So remember, when you grab an edge, you grab its corresponding edge, which again is the same one. So if you click an edge here and you see it flash in one of these sections, you know that this is the one that belongs over here to this particular section. So you can go through this and just find which belongs where, and just quickly line them up. And again, this is kind of a little a slight trick of just lining things up, because it is at this point going to be a little more creative about how does it look and a little less analytical. This is the button that does it for you. And all I'm doing is, again, I'm aligning things so that I can see which one of these slices belongs to, which one of these little ramparts belongs to what section. And I'm just going to do some bookkeeping here and organizing them so that they go to the proper area by process of reduction. Kind of line them all up here. All right, and that's pretty good for now. And you should be able, again, we can sort these out even more. But for now, we've lined up some of these on top so that you should be able to see the effect of it here with the lip. See these lips of the bowl and this border are looking pretty cool, looking neat. Good stuff. All right, so what we can do is turn off the image and get rid of the UV toolkit. Look at all that wonderful history being slowly built up, and we can move on to another section by turning on and off the layer, the appropriate layer. Okay, so jumping into this upper section, you may want to bring up the hypershade. And assign this to these other, the same texture to these other objects, just for points of reference. It looks absolutely ghastly right now, but given the layout of these UVs, it's just kind of all over the map, that's understandable. So let's go back to 5. I'm just going to be looking in hard shaded mode. Clicking on the upper part of this, in fact, I'm going to add the doorknob here to the layer that I don't necessarily want to see, which is, actually, you know what, I'm going to create its own layer from selected. And double click it, rename it. Pipes errata layer. And just turn them off. Okay, so we have the same situation here where we have a sphere and a cylinder. The cylinder has been, because we extruded it, it's all the same polygon space. All of the polygons that constitute this cylinder are laid one right over the other in this huge square. So really what we have here with this little inner grid, if you go into UV shell mode, is the sphere, which we want to initially work on. So let's actually take everything else, this UV setup, or you can grab, let's say faces, same thing. You've grabbed what you need. We're going to resort these by doing a cylindrical map. And it does so because it sorts things out in a default pose of kind of an upright soup can on the desk. And this is exactly the pose we have, so that looks pretty good. Now, you can also notice if you look here, you have this moment where interactively you can actually affect the way it's being mapped. So this little control, this kind of circular control that you've got is actually something you can manipulate by grabbing and moving. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this edge here and just kind of drag it so that it closes, and it's doing a better job of just making everything into a smaller square. See, when I move it back, it stretches it out. Could I grab this UV shell right now and just scale it? Of course I could. But again, several different ways of doing the same thing. So I'm going to close it out here. And then with it selected, I'm just going to kind of move it off to the side. UV shell, grab it. Just press W. You can move it off to the side. So in this case, we also want to, just because we can see the picture, we want to take this and we want to cut it up in the same way that we did the original ones. So we're going to use the same method to cut it up as per the bottom of the Phantasm Ball, which was a similar half dome. So we're going to select the appropriate strips and then unfold, making sure that we have one untouched line of polygons for it to be anchored. Okay, so let's go over here. We're going to cut up this sphere, turn the image off. All right, so we want to cut up the upper part of the sphere like we did the lower part earlier, but be very careful, because the assumption that we need to cut this up the same way, you are correct. The assumption that we will do it the exact same way is incorrect. We have a couple of things. First of all, remember that this is an edge. This cylinder piece did not exist in the lower Phantasm Ball, so if you were to grab an edge and use the little trick of select contiguous edges or some other automated method, it may not just select the length of the sphere, but then go right up into this cylinder because it's all the same polygon object in Maya's mind. So if I were to select, say, one edge here, and I go to our little earlier described trick of convert the selection to an edge loop, yeah, great, okay, wonderful. It ran the length of what we wanted, but when I press F, it frames everything that I've selected, and I've inadvertently selected the length of this pipe. We've already sorted the pipe out, so we don't want to do that. So be very careful about what you grab. The best way to do this is if you can use, you can do one of several things to select. You can just select each part by hand, holding down the Shift key. If you have the ability to double click, that's fine. That actually does not select the pipe on the left. And you can, again, just verify what you're doing by if you want to see what you have selected, press the F key and it will show you what you have selected. In this case, it's not including the pipe, so I know that I did not select that side. You can select everything, including the length of the edge, and then just hold down the Control key and deselect, same left mouse click, to get just that clean edge. The way I'm going to do is just double click because it's so fast. But those of you that are relying on other methods, those are you need to be careful about the Maya's offer to select the length of a loop for you, because that can be a little dangerous. So by pressing F, I have shown that I've only selected the parts on the sphere. I can also sort of just look at the 3D model and realize none of these sort of salmon pink lines are running the length of the pipe, so I know what I have, and I'm ready to deselect a line of polygons to anchor it. Now, very important, we had an anchor strip of polygons when we did the lower half of the Phantasm Ball, which meant that it was the hemisphere we had to nail down, and that was at the top of the object. In this case, this sphere is upside down from that, so our anchoring point is actually at the bottom. This is our hemisphere down here, and we want that to stay anchoring the rest of the operation. So I'm going to hold down Control and just run the length of that selection and deselect it. So now we have an uninterrupted line of polygons that is anchoring the operation of cutting as well as relaxing these strips. So we can come in and cut it, and I'm going to click off the object to validate that these are with the border on, these are the exact strips I want. I'm going to go in then to UV selection mode and select just what I want to relax, and I'm going to avoid touching anything on this line, on these edges here, as well as the edges above it. So I can go into Modify down to Unfold, and it should fold these lines accordingly. So this is best done when you get things out of your operation table that just don't apply. And in this case, it was this sort of smokestack that we wanted out of the way, and that was done much easier by getting it off the table for a more complex operation of these little orange slices. So take a moment. Now is a really good time to save your work. So let's move on to the Mario pipe. And to do that, I want to get this layer off and turn on whatever layer you have assigned your Mario pipe to. Now, going through these in my outliner, you can see when I grab all three, they are free of any groups. I basically went up here, and when I grabbed them from their groups, just the models and unparented, they were free floating. But since they're free floating and they don't have their UVs sorted out yet, it's actually easier for me to delete them, grab just one of them, go back and unrotate it, put it back to 0, 0, 0, and sort these out, UVs out, and after they're sorted, then propagate them throughout the model. So the first thing we're going to do is to grab the edge on the bottom, any edge on the bottom and the top that has this little phalange, and this edge, this lip as well. And then using our trick of coming up here to convert the selection to edge ring, we did that earlier. See, let's grab all these rings here on what constitutes kind of the two wheels that we can grab and then convert the selection to faces. And that allows us to project downward at once. Coming up here to UVs and go to planar, and I believe it's already on Y. We can check. Yes, it is. And it's going to project these two images here, one right on top of the other. And that's pretty cool, because what that allows us to do is grab the rest of everything and do a cylindrical projection on UVs. So we can come in here and grab all these edges and grab all this, or we can just come up here, since we moved everything out of the way and what remains is everything we want. Actually, we can come in here and just go and grab faces directly in the model. Now, one thing I've noticed here is I did not delete this face. There's no reason for this face. You don't see it in your model, so I'm just going to delete it and kind of select everything. So I have the outer ring, this ring that goes pretty much around the object here, and then the ring that goes inside. And from here I can come up under UV and do a cylindrical projection, and it's going to, I'm going to close this off the same way I did the other one. Boom. And I've got 3 different projections here. That doesn't look like 3, but there are 3. And the best way to do that is to go into UV shell selection mode and just kind of separate things out. And the way I'm going to separate them is I'm going to grab the outside and put it at the bottom. I'm going to grab the ring that constitutes, here's my progression. Outside, the ring here, then inside. And it's arranged quickly thus. And since I'm in UV shell selection mode, I'm able to kind of dance quickly through these different selections, either in the modeling window or the UV window. So I've sorted these things out. These are kind of complete. In fact, I can scale them, just make them a little bit shorter. And then once they are completely sorted out and ready to go, I can propagate them. But frankly, what I want to do is see how they look in the with their shader on them. So I'm going to bring up the hyper shade, and I can do this in one fell swoop here from the outliner. Just grab everything, right click on the proper shader, and just assign that material to selection. If I press 6 now, I'll see it on there, and we can actually see it in context with the rest of the texture. Things are obviously way too big, and we can scale them down en masse. And placement should be a little bit easier because we can kind of see where these particular UVs should go on the object. But let's leave them off for now, because we have to kind of finish the rest of the model first, and then we'll come back, place all the UVs where they should be, and that's kind of where when we want to propagate this into 2 more. So we don't want to do that just yet. Let's move on to kind of sorting out the doorknob looking model from here. All right, so let's close this down, these windows down, and only make visible that which we are working on. There we go. And these two, we can actually come up here to the visibility, and then we're being a little naughty here. Actually, let's not do that. That's going to be the start of the end. Just put them in the Mario pipes later. So with these two selected, the electrical power rods, just right click on Mario pipes or whatever layer you've got and just add selected objects, and they'll get out of your hair. And you don't have anything silly like, I don't know if these are not viewed or whatever. It's just a layer issue. Bring up all your layers. Everything should be visible. It's just a little easier to work with. Okay, so we've got this doorknob section. We need to sort this thing out. So let's go first of all into hard shaded mode. We're going to use a similar technique, which is that we're going to be cylindrically UV mapping everything that is, this is more evident here in an orthographic view, everything that is a horizontal line is going to get a cylindrical wrap, and everything that is a circular face facing the X direction is going to get a projection map from that direction. We've done similar things from the Y axis. Now we're simply going to translate that same power into the kind of the X axis. So the first callback we want to utilize is the one where we grab edges, and in this case it's going to be these edges here, 1, 2, 3, and everything that's horizontal like so. So I've got, like, you know, one selection of an edge here, one here, one here, one here. I did not double click this because I don't want these interior lines to be selected. So with all this selected, I'm going to come up to select, and we're going to go to convert selection, and we're going to go down to our little trick, the edge ring. See, it selects everything that is only basically a horizontal line, and we've got none of these other lines. I can go to wireframe to show you. None of these are selected that are this kind of spider webbing of the faces themselves facing the opposite direction. So go to select, convert selection to faces, and now we're ready to UV map this. So we're going to come up to a UV cylindrical, but note that Maya is still trying to map this as if it was a soup can sitting on a counter. And in fact, it is a, as you see, lightsaber on its side. So while we close this, this is not really the mapping direction we want. I don't know if it's showing up on the screen capture, but there's very faint circular lines. This red line's a little more evident. That it's still trying to map it as if it was some sort of a Warholian can sitting on its base. And if we bring up the UV editing window, you actually can see that things really are not being mapped in a way that we can use. So here's how it's currently being mapped, and we can tell that is an absolute Eye of Sauron mess. So what we want to do is, while we're still in the mode where it is giving us our projection to map, come up here and rotate the projection itself by 90 degrees. So you've turned the projection on its side as well, and now we have a nice cylindrical mapping that's adhering to the way that we have our cylinder. And you can see it's a lot more of a coherent map. There is a small little detail that one of these blocks is kind of knocked off down here at the bottom. Right about here is where you see that this stair step is a bit odd. We could fix that by cutting and moving everything over, but I have found that the best way to cure this is just come into the rotation of Z and just nudge it a bit, and it'll understand what you want mapped. So rotation Z value 1, and look at that, it fixed it very nicely. I think it's because it aligns perfectly. Our edges align better that way with its Maya's understanding of the projection. So with that all grabbed, you can actually go in and move the chosen UVs off to the side because we're kind of done with that. Everything left is more or less a face. So come into face selection mode. Everything left, is actually more or less a ring that we want. So we can do this and just project all along the rings that we have for these polygons here, these faces facing X. And for this, we want to come up to UVs, and it's going to be a planar projection, and we're going along the X axis. If it doesn't work out, we'll just undo and try it from the Z axis. It's one of the two. So I'm going to hit apply. That is the wrong axis because it's doing it from the side. See what it's doing there? So we just go, and actually we don't need to undo because everything is, well, I think we do need to undo. There we are, because it needs the faces selected. So let's try it from the Z axis. Hit apply. That's the angle we wanted. So that's all pretty good. Again, it's just a little process of reduction. And by virtue of elimination, we've gotten rid of everything we don't want to project in a certain view, and we're left with everything that we should project from just that Z axis. We do want to kind of drag these out, so let me drag them all away from each other. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here to my modeling window and stay in UV shell mode, because this way it allows me to kind of grab one face here, and then I can shift grab the other one here in the modeling window and just move it to the side. I have everything I want from those two faces. The next rings I want to grab are the kind of interior ones to the main hilt, I guess, of this little lightsaber, the hay. And we can do that by shift selecting the other side. So we've got both of these ends of the initial can selected. So we're going to move that off a bit to the side here. And what we're left with is the ringlets that are on the exterior, the furthest point here. Press F to come up a little more close. So we've successfully separated all these different rings out, which is good because that's actually how the texture map was done to accommodate this. And I'm going to order these so that they go kind of in a level of progression from outside to in, and just lay them accordingly. So we got this, got that, and actually these two need to be traded out. So let's just quickly move that one up, move that one over, and again, this is kind of all eyeballed just for now. So I've got the exterior, the base of this, and then I've got the interior ring, and then the sort of inner ring. And that goes for both. So if I select one, I've got the other one as well, and should work fine. 1, 2, 3. Hoo-ha. Beautiful. Save your work, please, because Maya is against all of us. All right, and coming back now, we've got this set of UVs. Pull it up so it's kind of off the surgery table, and we can finally, I think, collect everything and start parting it out. Oh, you know what? Sorry. One more thing. Just for detail work, come in here and grab the face of the furthest, most interior section of the socket. You see that? Just the kind of the little boxes way in the back of the socket. We're going to do some detail work here because we can. And it utilizes some tool tricks in Maya. Hold down the shift, grab the other ones. So we've grabbed some tool tricks in Maya that we've been doing thus far, and it's kind of cool to utilize these for different reasons. So we've got the interior faces selected of the sort of the electrical outlet. What you can do from here, since we just have those faces selected, is press the Shift greater than key on your keyboard. And what that's going to do is it's going to select all the faces next to it, adjacent to it. And what we want to do then is come up here to UVs and go down to something we've hardly used, something called automatic. And when you do automatic, what it's going to do is it's going to lay out literally all the faces into these different kind of arrangements. What you can do then is come in and sort of one at a time, we can grab each of these faces, move them to the side, and then when you see the adjoining faces here on the inside, like that one, you know that that belongs to the top. Bring it up here. This one belongs to the side. Bring it out here. This one belongs to the other side. And what you want to do is kind of lay these out so that one at a time you can connect these into sort of a flayed cube, inner cube, with no sixth wall. So you sew them, of course, by just pressing edges and going to cut sew, move and sew. Same one here, go to move and sew. Same on the bottom. And we slowly amass a collection of these outlets that look a little more manageable. The set of these particular outlets are going to let us line it up with a particular part of the texture without this becoming a huge headache for us. In fact, I'm going to scale these down a bit, so I'm going to name them that high. So you've got these kind of like, I don't know, hybrid lollipop things on top of each other. Make that out of all of your inner keyholes here, just as I did, and you should have 4 of them lined up. Bring them all on top of each other, and we'll continue from there. So just take a minute, stop the video, and do that, and we will resume once you're done. Okay, I've kind of thrown all mine together, and there's some little tricks I want to show you can use when you have, I've sort of scaled down the arms here on my humanoid, and you can grab it in UV shell mode, each one, and just drag it here to some place on your grid in the UV editor, and it will allow you to align them all very quickly on top of each other, since they all were projected using pretty much the same settings. Now, I've scaled some of the interior points and not some of the other ones, so of course we can use our little trick here. We grab everything that we want to line up, come down to linear align, and snap it inward. Same thing on this side, and we're going to use the other angle, which is this white line here, because I want it to adhere to the innermost UVs. And there we are. So everything is literally on top of itself. Each one of these little things, these UV selections, are kind of right on top of each other, including all the interior adjoining walls. And that lets us bring it up, and you can hold down the X key if you want, into kind of the middle of one of these ringlets for all of the faces. And I'm going to scale it down just a little bit more. There we go. In fact, what we can do is just hold down the X key, snap it to a grid, grab these, snap it to the same grid, and it'll align them perfectly. So that's a little trick you can use to sort of line things up. So we have a little popsicle man avatar, whatever it is, pogo stick robot, in the middle of this these ringlets here. And so let's start arranging this to match up with the texture. All right, so let's start arranging things. It's kind of a mess right now. So let's try to make sense of the UVs we've done and their placement on the texture. So first things first, take a look here to these three little images, 1, 2, 3. They actually align perfectly with the way that we've laid out these UVs all the way up. Yikes, way too big, all the way up here. So if we grab all these UVs in 3 sets, kind of scale them down uniformly for manageability's sake, and drag them down into the texture, you can see that we can start quickly aligning things and making sure that they match. Now what I'm focusing on is this middle ring, and I want to kind of just grab everything uniformly again, because I'm going to be taking care of I don't want to fix all things at once. I want to just take care of one aspect of these at a time. These seem to have lined up pretty well. That's kind of cool. And if I wanted to further modify it, I could come in here and grab these UVs and make sure they align perfectly with the holes, like so. And it may be better if I don't do it uniformly, but if I grab them and actually translate them down, then I can start hitting exact points and not doing it, UV by UV. When I want to take care of these, I can either, translate one out. Another trick I can do is if I've got 2 of them selected, I can just scale in one direction. And if I want to further modify, just go in and use the translate. But now is the time when I can come in here and really sort of dictate exactly matching these UVs to the texture map. Okay, some other things we can do really quickly to clean this up is, if you look inside here, you can notice that there's some stretching going on, because the pixels of these polygons are smashed down to absolutely nothing. So we can grab the edges on the inside here if we want. Actually, there's a number of ways we can do this. I'm just going to choose kind of the most accessible way, which is that I'm just going to go around, since the double click trick doesn't work if Maya gets confused about where things are, and it just means I have to spend a moment kind of selecting that edge, going around to the back and selecting the same edge, and then once I have them both chosen, I'm going to scale them down a bit in the UV editor, because that's what's going to separate them from the edge that's in front and keep it from being this kind of line. So I've selected all the interior rings on both of these parts of this doorknob, and I want to select them and scale them down, and simultaneously show you what that looks like when I scale them down. So again, we want to come up here to select and convert selection to vertices, and then I'm going to scale this slightly down. You see it kind of gives it a little more, just a little bit more color in here rather than just the straight streaking lines that happen when you just have one polygon right on top of the other. So that's pretty cool. These other ones we can sort out pretty quickly, including the edges, the CVs for all these sections of the outlet. Just pull them out until they more or less match the edge of the color. By the way, what you really want to do is, and this is sort of a policy overall, you never want to get your UVs actually right on the edge, because what's going to happen is it's going to pick up a bit of that dirt of the black. And so what you really want to do is you want to have your UVs kind of well inside, at least a little bit, the edge, because that way it's going to just inherit the color, and you have a little color buffer here so that this does not pick up any black, because that black might turn into streaking or give you a weird pop of color that you don't want. So I'm just grabbing the UVs that I need to grab, again selection square in this case, to grab all of them at once and just kind of pull them out of tad, so that in the end what I have is I've got a nice bit of color all the way around for the interiors. And you can actually see that change. See, all the interior here has inherited the color. I think it's a little more obvious if I go to object mode. See, the interior now has this nice sort of like gray, and it's got some inferred lighting, meaning that we don't really have this cool lighting. What we have is we have a texture that looks like it's lit more in the front, and as it recedes back, it gains this texture of darkness. And that was already on the texture, so that makes things look a little bit better. And really just lining up these rings one at a time is going to help us sort of fill out the color. I'm a big fan myself of just increasing the UVs throughout the entire screen, because you don't really need to see your 3D model right now. Again, what I want to do with this one is bring it well inside. If you look on the edge, it's got kind of, you know, it's ending right at the stair stepping of the jagged edge of these pixels, and you just don't want that kind of dirt there. So I'm going to pull this a little bit inside. It looks like I can't quite do it because I'm either sacrificing this inside ring or I'm sacrificing the outside ring. What I can do in that case is just go again to UV selection mode, select all of these interiors rings, and this is just me sort of being, you know, trying to be fastidious, and so I didn't grab the top one, and just scaling them all up so that all of them, oops, I didn't grab that one. I'm watching this as I do it, scaling them all up so that they fit inside that color ring nicely. I'm not going to worry too much about, you know, whether or not this edge is exactly on the edge, because it kind of goes to black here. So if this actually cuts into the black, the pure ochre itself, well, that's fine. I do want to fix this up because for the same reasons, it's going to look a little, you know, I've got the jagged lines kind of inside the UV sets, so it makes sense for me to grab these and just scale them a little bit inside here so that it kind of stays there. So I've got a nice sort of buffer all the way around, and it actually sort of kind of starts straightening out the rivets a bit. If I wanted to continue fixing those rivets, I would go into this inner circle here and maybe start scaling it, try to make these things look more circular, but I think it's pretty good for now. And you can see the ringlets, all of these things here, actually have inherited some nice color. I know it's a little hard to look past this absolute mishigas here, but you do see the ringlets sort of inherited the color that we've assigned to them. It doesn't look half bad. So if we go to this section, which are the other rings, you can see where to assign those. So let's pull them down onto a section of the texture that's going to make them look fairly decent. So let's jump in. Now, coming up to these UVs, I'm just going to kind of put these rings overall. We want to distribute amongst the textures so that we have kind of a way to tell the difference between these inner rings and these outer rings. So let's start laying out the UVs so that we have a nicer pattern. Okay, so we need to identify each of these sections. So this is sort of the far end, and then you've got this inner ringlet, the main body, and then it sort of continues back to the other end, going inner ringlet, and then the very last circular series of polygons. So let's arrange these on top of the texture where it makes the most sense. First of all, we don't want to scale each of these individually, because what we've done is we've made the texture consistent right here in this section where you see these sort of darker holes. That's for this entire doorknob lightsaber model that we've made. So let's drag things down first, press F, and without looking at the 3D modeler, let's just go into the UV window, pull back just a bit, and start arranging these out so that at least first we can uniformly fit the scaling of what we need. And that looks about right. And from here I can do an individual bit of scaling and translation, so at least I can get the edges to line up, save myself a little time inside the edges there. Wonderful. Okay, so each of these I can scale and then just move them up. I'm trying to keep things in a planar style so that I don't really have to spend too much time modifying things or tracking the information down about, well, where's this section, well, where's that section. The inner rings here, I'm going to use this kind of wooden part of the texture, and that's why I'm taking them and just placing them right over the brown. And in this case, I'm going to scale this down, and I can choose either this section or this, and frankly I like the brighter one. So let's just move this down to the brighter one. So you have your choice of what you can use and utilize. So everything should be fairly copacetic. When we go back to the model, let's again fill this section out so that it goes right to the edge of the page. I'm looking at, right to the edge of the art rather. I'm looking at both edges, trying to resolve everything at once. When it makes more sense for me to actually grab the UVs and just translate them down or up or over, then I'm going to do that. But a majority of what I did earlier is just scale these uniformly so I don't have to go chasing them down too much. So let's take a look at how things fit. Looks pretty good. And you do get to see kind of a nice transformation of things when you utilize different parts of the map, like so. So here we are. We've lined things up so that I can actually go through this and kind of show you where the lining up went. This upper section goes on this strip of gray. This is something I can use for I could switch this out for darker areas. I could use it at my discretion, but I like to utilize brighter sections. They're more visible. And then this inner area here is going to be that wooden texture. And then again, inner area, wooden texture, outer area here, the lighter shade of grade. And this middle bit here, I just scaled down to fit inside, by the way. Made sure that all these UVs are inside. In fact, I could probably kind of modify this one a little bit more, just dragging it down so it fits well inside the art. Same here at the bottom. And there we go. And then with it inside each bit of art, you can see that there's a bit of the dark holes here are sort of lined up where the pipes are. Now, of course, depending on how people scaled their model, it's going to affect the texture. That's just the way things are. So since there's a sort of slight bit of freedom in how people could have done it, even though we gave the exact scaling numbers to build it, as long as you get the idea that things can line up on textures as shadows, what sort of verifies that I'm doing this right is the fact that I'm going to go with the fact this is circular here. So the rivets are circular, not so much the dark hole, but it is lined up, so that's fine, and that works for me with this kind of steampunky look. If we go on then to these electrical outlets, or rather the lightning rods, I'm going to delete it because really I want to sort out this object before I put it back to where I have it with that 45-degree angle. So I'm just going to kind of keep it where it is, and I could probably turn this layer off and get rid of the little lightsaber doorknob section. So let's sort this one out. And again, you bring up your windows, go to Modeling Editor, UV Editor, and in this case you've got some little bit of retexturing to do. So what we're going to do first is just grab all of this and come up and go to UV, and let's just give this a cylindrical remap. So after we do that cylindrical mapping, I want to even this out. You can see that the way that I got this effect, I actually have this extra section here on the far left. So just like we fixed the Phantasm Ball sphere, I want to chop off this end here on the right. By the way, if you did not get this, you actually had it sorted out so that everything fits, then you don't need to do this step. But I do, even though I gave pretty explicit numbers to draw the cylinder at all width, not everyone gets the same effect. So what I'm going to do is just fix this. And I'm going to sew these all together. I'm going to also sew this top together. So there we are. So if your initial cylindrical UV mapping gave you this object, perfect. If you have to fix it like I just did, no worries. You can do so very quickly. Now we're going to, what I want to do is I want to take all this little big top circus tent, and I want to separate it into the separate spikes you see on the top of a picket fence, much like the default sphere UV unwrap in Maya. And to do that, I'm going to grab all these edges in one fell swoop, like so. I'm going to come up to cut and sew and just cut them. My borders validate that they're all separate sections now. And if I grab just this UV, I want to go over to Modify, Unfold, because I haven't grabbed any other UVs, so they're going to be sort of anchored by all the other UVs. And boom, it just gives you this kind of nice sharp edge. Okay, the next thing I want to do is separate out all these individual edges, because by virtue of doing a cylindrical unwrap, which comes from the side, it's taken all these polygons that are lined up, like this is lined up right with that edge of another polygon, and it's been flattened. So you see I'm grabbing this outer ring, and it shows me the second edge down here. If I grab the inner ring, same thing. So I got to separate these out. That's kind of important. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab just all the inside rings from each of these different phalanges and just pull them down. And I'm pulling them down because I want to separate out the polygons. So you see what I did there is I just dragged these edges down in the UV editor. Could have translated them to UVs first, but I decided not to. Then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to grab the inner rings on all the top sections of the flanges and just kind of move them up. There, so now I've got everything separated out, and if I grab a bunch of faces, 1, 2, and I'm just watching my UV editor as I grab these faces to make sure it grabs the next one down. And this is, again, this is just a method you can use to say, I'm going to validate my work before I just finish with the tool and say, but I did the tool so it had to work. Well, again, there's user error, Maya can be hinky sometimes. Just always validate the work you're doing before you continue, because you don't want the headache of it doesn't work. So there we are. We've undone them nicely, and now we want to grab this and kind of align it to the part of the UVs that were reserved for this particular section. So scale this down to a more reasonable size first of all, because we're going to put it over here in the upper left-hand corner. So we're going to we have some modifications ahead of us. So let's go to that section, pull back, and do some general scaling just to line things up. Again, we can do so in different axes until things start aligning. And I'm going to move this over. Again, I'm trying to keep things within the texture. That's going to make things look good. And I'm trying to initially line up all the spikes. And it looks like the spikes don't quite fit. So what do we do in this case? We panic. No, we just lower things down a bit. There, it works. This is the glory of production. So you take each of these UV sets and just kind of like move them up until they go to the next color band. And this way you're separating things out so that each of these UV sets inherits a particular color that will help delineate it from its neighbor. Basically all I'm doing is I'm going down to the next band of color, and I'm kind of making sure that the UVs stay within that band. Let me just bring up the UV set so you can see a little more clearly that each time I get a band of color, I just put it down to be well within that band. There we are. Looks pretty good. Not bad. And when we show the other pipes, we can grab this, and now with impunity we can duplicate it. I know that I had one of these at a 45-degree angle. Whoops, wrong axis. So let's try it in the x-axis, 45-degree angle, which means that I grab its newly created clone and do -45, and then cool. Not bad. So let's jump in and do the pipe next, and also try to finish off the rest of the Phantasm Ball so that things line up to this texture. All right, so turn the image off. Let's go into this particular part of the UV layout and grab everything at once. Turn the image on, and let's start sorting this section out. Okay, so what we have here is a nice section of texture that we're going to lay out for this Mario pipe, and you could probably tell that this is going to go down here. So again, I like to grab things all at once when they've been relegated to a particular rectangle or square in the texture. That's where I put it. So rather than grab these 3 different sections and move them over separately and things get misaligned, all I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, let's just grab all these UVs at once, try to sort things out as best we can in alignment both on the left and the right, at least with scaling, and then we can worry about sort of the sorting it out so that things align to the up and down. So this pipe, the section that we want is to inherit these rivets is this one, because that's where the rivets would be along the lip of the pipe. So this outer section, so be aware of which sections you're messing with initially. Our pipe kind of has to follow this similar setup. So if you're dealing with the inner section of your pipe first, be careful, make sure you've grabbed what you want and you're aligning it in the right section. This is the outer part of the pipe, and it's basically wood, and that looks neat. And now we grab the lip and we just sort of scale it up so that the rivets start looking a little more normal. And in this case, notice that I'm actually making a more circular rivet the more I scale this, not to the edge of the art, but scaling it so that I'm looking here at this the circular quality of the rivet. And I can just move it down and give that rivet a nice even spacing. So there we are. It's just that easy. So the top of this, of course, is its own little problem, which is we're going to come in now and grab all these UVs and scale them down until they really start hitting the exact, in fact, the inner part. Remember, we're not trying to get exactly on the line of the art, we're trying to get kind of inside the art. So that's going to work kind of for the outside. But what we also want to do is grab a nice section for at least an even section. Let's make sure we know what we're grabbing here. So if we go to UV shell, grab this. Okay, so this is the lower part, down here, and this is the upper part here. So what I would do is actually grab this lower part, scale it down further so it gets this darker section there, which is pretty cool. All right, so we've laid that out pretty well. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just sort out how to copy these using the same grouping technique. Again, just kind of push it up until it pops out of the Phantasm Ball just a bit. And I'm going to group it, and then I'm going to rotate this 45 degrees, and then I'm going to duplicate that group twice and rotate it, actually group it one more time. And this time the rotation is going to be 120, and the second one is going to be -120. And these are rotated in Y. So now I have equidistant pipes, all of which are UV laid out. Looking good. Okay. One of the last things we have to deal with is this Pball top layer. Let's hide everything else. Coming in here, we have the things kind of set up in a nice way. The UVs have already been sort of cut up, which is beneficial. So let's grab these UVs. And first of all, let's go down here to this edge, click on it, and let's cut it. Because we are going to align these particular UVs with these three and these three UV sets. Now, can you, if you are so inclined, just drag your UVs one on top of the other, and then everything's inheriting the same texture? Yes, you can do that. What I'm trying to do here is match them separately. I know I could have grabbed them all uniformly, but I didn't want to. And I can get them pretty close, but look, there's an inconsistency. So what am I going to do here? I've got this kind of black line going. I'm just going to free myself up from having to do an unnecessary bit of keeping things together by just cutting them. So now I've got separate UV sets, these UV shells. I can actually just move over and kind of sort out one at a time so that things work out perfectly. Now I frankly want to uniformly scale these three, even if they're no longer connected, because otherwise I'm going to be kind of looking for the perfect scale for each of them and messing about when I can do things uniformly. So I've got these kind of within their lines finally, and I'm going to grab all three and just shoot it up a bit. All right, these look like they're kind of within the confines of their art, and let's check how it looks. Yeah, not bad. Okay, cool. And here are the sort of shadowy holes where the Mario pipes are going to stick out of. So what we need to do here is just come up and do the same thing with this top row. But what you're going to want to do first is sort of flip them over. And to do that, we're going to want to come up here under Tools, go to Rotate, and go to the Options, and Step Snap. I'm going to turn this on, and I'm going to turn it for 90 degrees. So in this case, I can rotate this, and it'll snap every 90 degrees until it's perfectly upside down. I'm going to bring it down here and try to line things up and kind of do the same thing I did earlier. I know I could have probably saved myself a little bit of time by scaling them uniformly with the others, but honestly this is not too much of a hassle. And in this case, I know that they're kind of individual enough that they're all going to need sort of their own separate modifications. So I'm going to grab these edges. What I've done is I've lined this one up so that it's kind of well within its art. In fact, hold on, let's just scale this out a bit more. I bet I can push it. Push it just a bit. There we go. Okay, so grabbing these edges, 1 and 2, cut so let's cut those two. Let's go now to UV shells. Just move these over. They should fit fairly evenly into their new home of art with a nice overlap. And when I come out, the whole, I want to notice whether or not things are lining up. They may not. So can you tell me what's wrong here? So what we have is we have two sections that are actually sort of flipped. And for me to find out where where that flipping is, I kind of want to run up and down. It looks like the flipping all began over here when we sorted out the top. So we've got this one sort of wrong and that one sort of odd. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to just change these out. So if I grab the so let's grab the problem ones, and move them over until they make sense. So what have we determined? The ones we're going to be looking at are going to be 1, 2, 3. Okay, so we're just going to look at this hemisphere here. That's what we need to sort out. And our goal is that the one with a hole should be here, hole should be here, and the half hole should be here. So what do we need? We need a section that actually answers this hole, so that it has we need this pattern over here. So it looks to me like we need to switch out these two. There we go. And move this one over here. It starts to form a hole, and I'm going to grab this one, and look what I'm going to do here. I'm going to choose what I want. See, these are all little tricks you can use to make the model work. And that is not the one we wanted. We wanted this one. Cool. There, I fixed it. So hopefully this tutorial is giving you a sense of not just telling you what to do, but also figuring out problems and solutions along the way, because that's really part of the production of pretty much building anything. So if I grab the UVs here, well, let's just pull back a bit, grab the UV shell here, we can come in and actually place this along that texture and just scale it down until it fits. You see how it goes from dark to light. But what's really cool about this is that there's actually several different textures you can use to throw on this. There's sort of a selection of things you can utilize. You could utilize this gray and that gray. The smaller the art, the more pixelated it's going to look. In this case, we just chose something that's kind of, a little bit dark, but you can see kind of the lightening up near the top. So let's take a look at our Phantasm Ball now, looking pretty nice. In fact, we might choose a slightly different section for that neck. But now I'd like you to grab all the groups of the Mario pipes, now that we see where the black holes are, and just pull them slightly down so that they more or less line up where the holes are. Not perfect, but more or less. Also, we can take this and rotate it a bit, like so that things do line up. So again, we're modifying, we're changing, we're kind of improving things as they go along, rather than saying there's just one way of doing things and it's perfect, because that is not production. The last thing we need to sort out is this little bottom section. We got sort of a taste of the UVs earlier. Let's just continue this, and this will be the last section we need to worry about. So if we go into Windows, Modeling Editors, and UV Editor, let's finish this one up. So the ones we actually want to kind of improve upon slightly are these here. You see that in fact this section, we're going to do kind of a neat little trick. We need this. This is the top of the Phantasm Ball texture. This is the bottom. So I'm going to show you folks a little trick, which is we could do what we did with the top of the Phantasm Ball, which is we flipped the UVs and moved them to where they needed to be. But in this case, I'm going to just cut these sections so that the UV shells are separate. Grab all these UV shells and just move them over. Okay, so the alignment's not perfect, but you can massage that. But look what we have done in record amount of time. Now some of the massaging needs to happen to fix these little black divots, which means that if you come into where you need to aim is pretty much here. You see this this edge maybe just a little bit high. I suggest you moving the UVs, not the edge. But you could grab this, and we can do a little experiment of just dragging it ever so slightly down. As long as it doesn't compromise that rivet circle too much, I think you'll be in the money. The second place you want to kind of line things up is to go here one by one on each of these UV shells and just make sure that it sort of fits within the art. You don't want it to overlap, because that's where you get these ugly black lines that sort of hide out in the forest of the art overlapping. And you can see that things are not perfectly aligned, but you can certainly get here by just doing a little housekeeping and aligning them inside the art rather than trying to match the exact UVs. Also, it's arguable that we have grabbed these UVs they're a little too close to the top. So we can do kind of this move. Just move everything down slightly. Now it's going to make the rivets go a little closer to the top, but I think it's going to get rid of some of the black lines better. So there we are. Nicely done. For those of you that want to spend some time trying to get rid of the black stripes here, well, please do. You know the tool sets that you need to use to make this an even better Phantasm Ball. And so I invite people to do that. And just as a flourish, let's improve the neck slightly on this, just as the last little coup de grace of this object. So let's go. So jump in, bring up your modeling window or your UVX editor window, and let's grab this and put this on a much more interesting surface on the texture, which is the one right above it. So massage this, and it's small enough that we can just do this interactively while leaving the window up, and you can drag it near the top, and there we are. It's slightly better looking. In fact, I'm so excited by this. I'm going to just raise it up to show that cool little neck. So there we are. So you've learned not just how to do this Phantasm Ball, but you've learned how to texture things through. And you should definitely save your scene. Just take a moment, save the scene, as I've been doing. You should have a lot more saved versions of this than mine. And we're going to do one last bit of business, which is you want to grab all the models, and you want to come up here to Mesh, Combine, go down to Delete All by Type, History, and you basically should just have empty groups that do not affect this at all. Phantasm Ball Mesh, rename it. And what you have now, folks, is a finished Phantasm Ball. Turn your grid back on so you can still see its size. And I would also delete these layers. I need to select them first, of course. Okay, so I've renamed my model. I've got my model frozen. There's no history. And the parting shot I want to do under here is under the rendering editors, Hypershade. I want to make sure that I have correctly named the shader, Pball shader. Excellent. And that is your finished homework. So save that out. And you might want to put your name, Pball. Let's do this. _ Do not write my name. You've got your own. Pball underscore Scott underscore Easley, and that'll be very clear about what you're handing in and where. And this should let you finish this assignment up with ease. Happy modeling.